the benefits of going into silence? So, Puja Swamiji, my guru, the head of Paramarth Niketan, observes 14 hours of silence a day, 10 at night to 10 in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. In earlier phases of his life, he went into periods of silence up to over a year and a half. 40 days was pretty standard, the turn of the season several times a year. So silence is something that we encourage a lot here. Taking vows of silence is something that's very, very core to the Indian spiritual tradition, to the Vedic traditions. Now, first of all, it's important to understand that silence doesn't just mean mouth is closed. That helps. That's sort of a non-negotiable aspect of it. But that's the beginning, not the end. It's not just an absence of speaking. It's actually also an absence of a refraining from other types of noise that keep us from experiencing the fullness of silence. A lot of us think of silence as just an absence of noise. If you say, oh, it's really silent, what it means is there's no noise. But silence within ourself is not an absence of noise. It's actually a presence of divinity. It's a presence of experienced bliss and peace and divine presence that we can't hear most of the time because there's too much noise. There's too much noise of our own voices. There's too much noise of our heads planning what we're going to say next. There's too much noise of the TVs we're listening to or whatever we're listening to. There's too much noise of the conversations we're having. And so we can't actually drop into the truth. And so when we observe silence, it's not, I'm in silence, but yeah, you can just jabber away at me. It's, I'm in silence, dropping as deeply as I can into the truth of who I am. And so you don't always have to go into a cave to be silent. In fact, Puja Swamiji emphasizes that in our homes, everyone, married people, parents, should observe silence at least an hour a day, not while you're sleeping. Because it does many things. So first of all, what it does is it gives us an opportunity to experience actually the fullness within ourselves. And it doesn't mean that nobody can talk to you. If you have a child or a spouse who needs to tell you something important, no problem. But it really is an invitation to others in the home, in the office place, to curtail unnecessary conversation around you, to support that silence that you are in. And what it does is it gives us that experience of the fullness within. It also gives us an incredible teaching of how to grab the space between a thought and an action. How many people here have ever said something that you later regret? Raise your hand. Has anybody not ever said something that you later regret? Okay, right, so unanimous. So how does that happen? You think later, oh, that wasn't me, and we have to go back to people and say, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't what I meant. Wo mera matlab nahi tha. Well, you said it, If it wasn't what you meant, why did you say it? Like, who was in charge of your brain at that moment that something you didn't mean managed to come out of your mouth? Who else is in there pulling the strings, making you say things that you don't mean? What silence gives us is a teaching and a practice of having a choice before we speak. Because what happens when you go into silence, at least the first few days of it, even if you're in a long extended silence, the first few days, the mind will think of something to say. It'll think of what you're going to say next, what you have to tell someone. And then automatically you'll say, oh wait, I'm in silence, I can't. Or somebody will do something and you'll be about to say something to them. And then you realize, oh, wait, I'm in silence. And so you stop. And that teaching is incredibly profound, because what it teaches you, if you practice silence for long enough, even if it's just an hour a day, if you do it enough days in a row, is, oh, wait, I actually have a choice. Those words were about to come out of my mouth, but then I remembered I was in silence. And so I stopped them. Which means I actually have much more control and consciousness than I utilize on a daily basis. And so it gives us an opportunity in our lives to also grab that space. Even if I'm not in silence at this moment, do I really want to say that? Does that need to be said? In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna speaks about the righteous speech, tapas of speech. And he says it needs to be three things. In order for something to be considered dharmic speech, it must be true, of course, but it must also be kind and beneficial. And I've heard other teachers of other traditions add a fourth to that, which is, it must improve upon the silence. And so before we speak, it's a beautiful practice to really ask yourself, is this true? Is it kind? Is it beneficial? And 2 out of 3 doesn't count. And also, does it improve upon the silence? And if not, to be silent. But being silent is something very, very difficult for most of us, particularly those of us from abroad. You sit in an environment with people, and everybody feels, if there's 30 seconds of silence, suddenly people become very uncomfortable. Everybody's looking around, somebody think of something to say. Like, this is really uncomfortable. In India, that doesn't exist at all. I've been in 6-hour car rides between here and Delhi with a car full of people, pretty much no one of whom says a word for 6 hours. People who love each other, family members, friends, but just nothing to say that improves upon the silence. And so the practice of silence gives us that teaching. We lose a lot in speech. You lose a lot of energy. So if you're fasting, for example, if you're not eating, one of the teachings of fasting is you should also try to be as silent as you can, because speaking uses a lot of energy. And if you're not taking in food, careful how you use your energy. We learn it at high altitudes. You go on a high altitude trek. We go to Kailash Mansarovar. You go to Badrinath, Kedarnath, where you're short of oxygen. Speak less. You're unnecessarily using energy. If you're dehydrated, speak less. You're literally spitting out water molecules along with your breath. So silence rejuvenates and recharges us on many, many, many levels. Don't think, though, it's empty. it's full. And that's why it's such a beautiful experience, is when you allow yourself to really drop into it, you'll experience a fullness of the self that we don't usually get to experience because there's so much noise going on. And it's amazing because we then go to places, to courses, to retreats, to things to find silence, without realizing that actually, if I could just quiet the noises in my own head, all we have to do is learn how to quiet the ruckus in our mind. That's what our spiritual practice is about. That's why we meditate. That's why we pray. That's why we do seva. That's why we observe silence. That's why we do all of these spiritual practices, is because they quiet the ruckus. That's why we do our mantra jap, chanting. It quiets this so that the truth of who we are, which is this, emerges into our consciousness. It's always been there, but that's why I say silence is actually full. It's full of Om. It's full of peace. It's full of truth. It's full of divine connection. It's just absent of ruckus.